everybody. In accordance with Section 5 of the Open Public Meetings Act, be advised that notice of this meeting was made by posting on the bulletin board in Town Hall, posting on the front door of Town Hall, forwarding to the Millburn Township Clerk, and mailing to the Item and the Star Ledger, which publications are the officially designated newspapers, a notice indicating that this regularly scheduled meeting would take place on Wednesday, February 3rd, 2021 at 7:30 p.m. via the Zoom platform. In addition, in accordance with NJSA 10491 and NJAC 539.1.5b, electronic notice of this remote meeting, giving the time, date, location, and to the extent known the agenda of this meeting and whether formal action may or may not be taken, has been given by posting the same on the Millburn Township official website and on the main access door to the building where the public would routinely attend in-person meetings. Zoom login information for all planning board meetings conducted in 2021 was provided in the notice as well as on the agenda for tonight's meeting. As a reminder, in accordance with Section 7A of the Open Public Meetings Act, planning boards in general and the Millburn Township Planning Board in particular do not entertain general public comment as is otherwise required for municipal governing board or Board of Education. However, all members of the public shall have the right to ask questions of witnesses presented by the applicants during the course of a public hearing on an application for development and will further have the right to make any comments with regard to that application at the appropriate time when recognized by the chair. Thank you. Roll call.
Daniel Baer.
Here.
Gaston Halpert.
Here.
Mark Matzel.
Here.
Maggie Miggins.
Here.
Sanjeev Vinayak.
Here.
Srini Vijay.
Here.
Chairwoman Betzel.
Here.
Before we start, this iPhone here, I don't know who this is, but I don't know. I'm going to put them back.
Okay,
Unless that's, I don't know who it is.
no problem. Okay, thank you. So our first item on the agenda tonight is the approval of the minutes from our January 6th, 2021 meeting, which were circulated on January 29th. Did anybody have any comments, questions, or corrections to the minutes as circulated? Okay, anybody like to make a motion to approve the minutes? Okay, Mark, I think you're doing it, but you're muted. Yeah.
Motion to approve.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and if anybody was not in attendance, although I think we were all there, you would abstain. Thank you. Meeting minutes from January 6th, 2021 approved. Next item on our agenda is notice application 20007, which is 85 Woodland Road for preliminary and final site plan approval. This is the official notice, and council will correct me if I misstate anything, that this matter is being carried to the special meeting on February 24th, 2021. And because of this announcement, it no longer requires any further notice. It's just being carried to February 24th meeting. Sound good?
I would just add, it will be at 7:30 p.m. And it will be through the same Zoom platform. And the access information is the same that it has been for this meeting, but it can be found on the township's website along with the agenda and the application materials. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said.
Before we continue, I'm trying to, Nicole, this iPhone that's on the main screen, I have no idea who it is, but I can't return them to the attendee. It won't let me. It's bizarre. It asked me if I want to promote them to panel. Okay,
It just went.
there we go. Okay. Did you do that, Nicole?
No,
Okay, I don't know who that was, but okay,
they're gone.
they're gone.
They'll be back.
I texted Joe Steinberg. I have not heard back from him.
Okay,
So,
thank you. We will proceed. So with that, our next application for the evening is 20012 Beehive Properties for preliminary and final site plan approval. And we welcome them back for the continuation on this matter.
all right, I'm bringing over Bart Sheehan. And he can tell me who will be presenting tonight.
Good evening.
Mute.
You are muted, sir.
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We sure can.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, 3 administrative issues at the outset. May I ask, please, whether or not the members who have not been on the board prior to tonight have read or listened to the transcripts and are available for deliberation and decision?
And that would be Maggie Miggins, Sanjeev Vinayak, and Srini Vijay. I know that both meetings are up on the YouTube channel. I know Sanjeev, we had been speaking about it, so I don't know if all 3 of you have had an opportunity to watch the meetings.
I did.
Okay,
I did as well.
okay.
Thank you. Should we do, Eileen, what we had done for a different hearing, but with the same situation? And thank you for raising this issue of having them testify, and then you'll follow up via any written documentation as needed.
I will send them a
Certification.
certification to have them fill it out.
Okay, thank you. And counsel, I appreciate you raising that question.
All right, thank you. The second point is to respond to Mr. Butzak's request for a circulation of the evidence list. I have to confess that I've been remiss in that responsibility, and I will discharge it tomorrow. For the record, I show 21 pieces of evidence introduced into the proceedings to date, and will have in my opening a slight modification of the entrance at Milburn Avenue that will also be a part of the presentation this evening. And finally,
Mr. Sheehan, before you go on, before you get off the exhibit list, I concur that there are 21 exhibits on my list as well. I seem to recall, but I'm not sure it was this application, I think it was, that there were a number of exhibits that were put up on the screen that had not been previously furnished to the board, and that Mr. Minow orOnsafama or you were going to ensure that they were sent to the board. Am I mistaken on any of that?
no, all of those exhibits have been filed with the board, Mr. Butzak.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I apologize for interrupting you. Please proceed.
All right, thank you. And at the outset, Madam Chair, may I take a roll call of my witnesses to make certain that all are logged in?
Yes, we'd invite you to call them so we can bring them on in right now if you would like.
Thank you. Mr. Mark Yeager, a principal.
Do you want them brought over, Mr. Sheehan? Or
Well, I'd just like to know that they're logged in.
I do see Mark. I see Mark. I see Mike Lanzafama, Craig Paraguay, Stuart Johnson.
That's it.
They're all in the attendees.
All right, thank you.
Eileen, I see Joe Steinberg as an
Oh,
attendee.
there he is. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so do we want to announce for the record that Joe Steinberg has joined the meeting at 7:42?
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the board. This is the third meeting for the Beehive application at Block 1211 lots 1 and 7. It has previously benefited from the testimony of Mark Yeager on behalf of the principal, Mr. Lanzafama, the civil engineer, and Stuart Johnson, the architect, in whose testimony a fully conforming site plan application in respect of the RMF AH2 ordinance recently adopted, proposing 53 units of residential living apartments, 8 of which will be affordable units distributed throughout the improvement in an inclusory manner. The proposal has 2 means of access on Milburn Avenue and Spring Street, with a loading and delivering area carved out on Essex Street. The proposal includes the required 3,000 square feet of space devoted to commercial use on Milburn Avenue. Having heard the testimony on behalf of the principal and the disciplines of civil engineering and architecture, the only witness remaining on the applicant's presentation is in the field of traffic engineering. In regard to that presentation, which will focus on the points of access to and from the site and the loading and delivery carve-out on Essex Street, the applicant, after hearing concerns expressed in regard to the access point on Milburn Avenue, has agreed to amend the plan to reset the Milburn Avenue overhead automatic garage door back into the garage another 10 feet. It is asked that the application be so amended and that this amendment be carried as a condition of approval of any favorable review that this application might secure from the board. The traffic engineer will incorporate this amendment in his presentation. If there are any questions that are outstanding in the minds of the board or members of the interested public, I would be prepared to address them now. If not, I would ask that the testimony of Craig Paragoy be taken in this matter and that he be admitted to the platform to be sworn in for that purpose.
Thank you. I didn't exactly understand the distinction between the 2 questions, because we still would reserve the right to ask this man the questions regarding the location of the entranceway, or you're saying that is somebody different?
No, I'm just asking whether or not the board has any questions of me based on my opening, that's all.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I understand. I'm guessing we would like to hear from the witness, but did anybody have any questions for Mr. Sheehan before we jump in? Okay, great. Oh, I'm sorry.
I do. Mr. Sheehan, the traffic engineer had provided previously a fairly comprehensive report and analysis and level of service evaluation of that access off of Milburn Avenue. So what I would expect tonight is the information consistent with what was previously provided in the traffic engineer's report.
Yeah, that's correct, Mr. Fair. His analysis will be not only qualitative, but will be quantitative.
Oh, good.
In explicit dimension.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Please welcome Mr. Paragoy, and let's get him qualified as appropriate.
If you, let me just swear him in. If you just raise your right hand, do you swear from the testimony you're about to give in tonight's Zoom hearing to be the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
You just state your name for the record, please.
Sure. My name is Craig Paragoy, P-E-R-E-G-O-Y.
Right now, Mr. Paragoy, it is my understanding that you have not testified before this board in the recent past. So I'm going to ask you if you would qualify yourself by beginning with describing your profession and licensure?
Sure. I have a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Virginia Tech. I'm a licensed professional engineer in New Jersey. I'm working as a traffic engineer for over 20 years now, and I appear pretty much on a nightly basis before planning and zoning boards throughout the state as an expert in traffic engineering.
Can you give us 3 boards that you have appeared before in the recent past of comparable dimension to Millburn Township?
Well, often with you, Bard, and Summit. Parsippany, I was in Parsippany last week. And I'm trying to think of another one close by, Madison recently.
And is your current license a New Jersey license in good standing?
It is.
I would submit him to voir dire, Madam Chair, of the board and members of the interested public on his qualifications to testify in the field of traffic engineering as an expert in that field.
Thank you, Mr. Paraguay. We will hear you as such. And just to confirm, you also were the one who prepared the documents that you'll be speaking to tonight?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
All right, Mr. Paraguay, please describe for the board what steps you took to prepare yourself to discharge the commission of evaluating this application from the perspective of a traffic engineer.
Sure. What we did was prepare a traffic impact analysis that obviously was submitted to you. I will go through it and hopefully not too boring of a detail and hit the highlights of it for you as to what we did and how we prepared that traffic study.
Mr. Paraguay, I apologize for interrupting. Please just speak clearly and loudly. I'm having a little trouble hearing. I hope I'm not the only one.
I am too.
I hope I am the only one. But okay, just loud and clear. Thanks so much.
Got it. Okay. So what we did in preparing our traffic impact study, we started off by taking traffic counts. And what we're looking at for a development like this is the weekday morning and weekday evening peak hours or rush hour time periods. That's when the roadway would be at its busiest, as well as a primarily residential development would also be at its busiest, people going to and from work. We did our traffic counts in November of this past year of 2020. Obviously, with the pandemic going on, the traffic volumes are much lower than you would expect to have normally found at that time. Fortunately, in this area, we did have some NJDOT traffic volume data from 2018, just down the road on Milburn Avenue. So we were able to use that data to bump up our traffic volumes that we picked up in 2020 to get, I've been calling them normalized traffic volumes for typical conditions if we hadn't had the restrictions in place with the pandemic. So that gives us a pretty good baseline of what we would have seen and what we will likely see going forward, hopefully, when this project is constructed. What we next do is do what's called a capacity analysis. What we looked at in this case, the site is surrounded by streets essentially on all sides. You have Milburn Avenue as sort of the main drag at the south end. Spring Street is a one-way northbound street to the east, and then Essex Street behind the site sort of wraps around back to Milburn Avenue, and that westerly frontage is actually called Douglas Street. It's an extension of Douglas Street, but it certainly feels like Essex Street if you're driving on it. So what we took a look at is the intersections of Douglas Street and Milburn Avenue, Spring Street and Milburn Avenue, and Spring Street and Essex Street. I prepared what's called a capacity analysis. That's based on the traffic volumes, the stop control, the signage, lane widths, all that sort of information. And it's put into a computer program that gives us the average delay per vehicle, which then we relate to a level of service, with A being the best level of service or the least amount of delay, F being the worst or a failing condition. It's not really like grades in school, because a good level of service for a peak hour for design purposes would be a level of service D. That's what you'd be shooting for if we were designing a new intersection. And I don't know about everybody else, but that wouldn't have been so good for me when I was in school. So it's not quite like school, but it does give you sort of an easier way to understand the traffic delays associated with intersections and what the impacts of our development would have on them. So under those normalized existing conditions, what we would have expected to see in 2020, all of those intersections are operating at level of service C or better. That Spring Street and Essex Street intersection is actually at a B, with the Milburn Avenue intersections with Douglas Street and Spring Street at a level of service C. So that gives us our baseline of what we see today, what we would have today. The next thing I have to do is sort of look into the future and determine what additional traffic would be on the roadway network and forecast how much traffic our project would generate. What we do is refer to the New Jersey DOT. They publish growth rates for this area. The growth rate around here is 1.5% per year. So we take those normalized traffic volumes, add a 1.5% times 2 years to get the future volumes that would be present without this project. In order to identify the traffic volumes that this project will generate, what we do is consult the Institute of Transportation Engineers, or ITE, their trip generation manual. And basically it's a compilation of research traffic counts taken throughout the country. And in this case, we're looking at obviously the residential building and that retail, that 3,000 square foot retail component. And based on the size and the number of units, we're able to project the anticipated peak hour traffic volumes. Now, what's interesting is if I take a look at what the bank that's on the site would have generated based on those same ITE rates, it actually generates more traffic, particularly during the evening. The morning bank isn't really too active or open, but in the evening peak hour, that bank would generate more traffic than what we're proposing. So we're actually, by doing this development, reducing the trip generation or the traffic generation potential of the property. What the ITE data tells me is that in the morning peak hour, this project would generate 21 total trips. A trip is a vehicle either entering or exiting the property. During the evening peak hour, 35 total trips. Now, typically, what New Jersey DOT uses and many jurisdictions use to determine if you should do a traffic study or you might have what's called a significant increase in traffic is have a threshold of 100 peak hour trips or more. So we're at about a third of what you'd consider a significant increase in traffic. And again, on top of that, we're removing that bank that could, if reopened, generate more traffic than what we're proposing. We didn't take any credit for that bank. We're just assuming that we're adding all of our traffic over vacant land. On top of that grown percentage of traffic to account for future conditions. And then we rerun those analyses for the future with and without this project. We have the no build and build conditions is what we call it. And when I rerun those analyses, those levels of service do not change as a result of this project. They remain at a level at a C and a B, C on Milburn Avenue, B in that back intersection at Spring and Essex. The site driveway on Milburn Avenue is at a C, and the site driveway on Spring Street in the back is at a level service A. So both of those access points will work well, and we do not change those levels of service. And in fact, if you look at the math, the actual numbers, the delay per vehicle numbers, the increase is less than a second per vehicle average delay. So very minimal impact. And given that level of trip generation, that's what we'd expect. So from a traffic impact perspective, certainly this is not going to have any adverse impact. And if you look at it in the theoretical construct of the fact that there's a bank there now, you're actually going to have an improvement from that potential of the bank reopening and becoming an active occupied bank site again. So from a traffic impact perspective, I think certainly this project will work fine. You won't notice much difference in traffic volumes at the adjacent intersections today versus if this were constructed.
Now, Mr. Paragoy, may I interrupt you at this point to ask you whether or not you or those acting under your guidance made a specific physical examination, excuse me, of the proposed site and the surrounding area?
Yes, absolutely. I personally have, and my staff who worked on it, and obviously we had the traffic counters who were sitting there for 2 hours in the morning and in the evening observing the conditions.
You have given us the level of service analysis, and I'm going to ask you if you would segregate the parking analysis and focus on the main access point at the intersection of the project and Milburn Avenue, and indicate whether or not, with the amendment that backs up the location of the automatic overhead door 10 feet from its current proposed location functions at a level of service that represents no threat to public safety, and in fact promotes public safety to a significant degree with the increased setback.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, that driveway operates at a good level of service. We heard the concerns of the board the last time about the proximity of that gate, particularly to the sidewalk. Now, these gates, they roll up quick. This is a fast action gate. It's on the order of 10 seconds to open. But if for some reason it didn't open or was jammed or something happened, a vehicle in the old configuration would have still been on the sidewalk partially waiting to enter the building. By setting it back 10 feet now, you have one full car length available between the gate and the sidewalk. So I think that eliminates some of the concern that the board has. You know, we don't anticipate that really ever being a problem. These gates go up quick. By the time you pull in, you barely slow down. But it does make sense. We do have the depth there, and I thought it was a good idea to push that gate back if we could, and the architect confirmed that we were able to do that, which I think is a benefit.
The original setback of the gate was 23.5 feet. So is it the new proposal that setback would be increased 10 feet?
Yes, so it would be 33.5 feet from the curb line, but that gives you 24 feet to the sidewalk. So you have enough, around 24 feet to the sidewalk. So you have enough room for a vehicle to sit at the gate and not block the sidewalk.
I request, do we have a display available to illustrate this? I don't know if you have one of your site plans handy that a screen share is possible. If not, it's okay. Just it might benefit the conversation sometimes to see it.
I think that if we could ask Mr. Alonso Fama to share on his screen his sheet 4.
Okay, Eileen, you may need to bring him in so he can have sharing rights. Thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to do that.
Otherwise, I have the very low-tech version here.
Yeah. Good evening, Mr. Lanzafama. Thank you.
Can you all see that now?
Yeah.
And this is what Craig is talking about here. Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, see the gate, basically where the line, under the word egress, where the edge of the building was, that's essentially where the gate was. But as you can see, there's a deep enough driveway throat that we were able to push it back. So now it's pushed back far enough that would allow a vehicle to sit on the upward pointing arrow to the right side of the driveway. It would be partially under the building, but it would be outside of the sidewalk.
Maybe, Madam Chair, it would be appropriate at this stage to take questions with regard to concerns for the functioning of the Milburn Avenue point of access.
Great idea. Thank you. I certainly have a question. Does anybody else? Would anyone else like to go first? Okay. I guess, Mr. Fargo, I don't know if you can testify to it, but this is an intended setback at the ground floor only, or would it carry up?
Just at the ground floor, just the vehicular gate that raises and lowers when a vehicle pulls in. Everything else would look the same. That gate is just recessed further.
Just the location. So it's not a physical change to the building.
Correct.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Joe.
I would like the witness to indicate why he thinks this is safer, this 10-foot setback of that gate, why it is safer for people who are walking on the sidewalk.
Sure. I mean, honestly, I thought the location that it was typical and would have worked. We heard your concerns though, and felt that it would make sense to be able to allow a vehicle to pull completely past the sidewalk before encountering that gate. Now, 199 times out of 1,000, that gate's already open by the time a vehicle gets there. If for some reason it weren't though, now that car isn't stopping in the sidewalk and blocking the sidewalk. I don't see any safety implications in terms of the access point there. As a matter of fact, I think it's a little bit safer than what you had now. We're moving that driveway farther away from the intersection at Douglas Street, although not much, but a little bit more than it is today. And you had a fairly active driveway there with that bank and the drive-in lanes initially crossing the sidewalk. And again, more traffic than what we're looking at here. you have good visibility of vehicles and pedestrians, and now you have that full vehicle length between the gate and the sidewalk. So I think from a safety perspective, I don't see any issues at all.
Thank you. Mr. Bear, question.
Mr. Paraguay, thank you for your testimony, and I commend you and the applicant for listening to us and our concerns about the gate and moving the gate into the building and allowing for a car to, I think, better processing in the vehicles. But one thing I wanted to talk to you about is that I looked at your level of service analysis, recognizing this was done previously for the old design. However, the conditions are different than they would be with the bank. The bank itself just had traffic accessing and egressing from the site. The bank did not generate a lot of foot traffic in that location, okay? So with the new site plan, you have 3,000 square feet of retail with the understanding that, the retail would generate, some level of pedestrian, circulation, similar to what's going on in the rest of the downtown. Your analysis didn't take into consideration any kind of pedestrian friction factor when you calculated your level of service. So let's assume that, this 3,000, in your opinion, as a professional traffic engineer, let's assume that we're going to have a new level of pedestrian traffic here. That's obviously the intent for extending the retail down to this location. So bringing that into the analysis, applying it to the level of service analysis, in your opinion, what then would result? Because you're right now sitting at level of service C. Do you think that you would see a situation where it would decrease to level service D or worse?
No, absolutely not. And we do include pedestrians in our analysis. We have them in our counts till we counted the existing pedestrians that were out there.
Okay.
The pedestrians don't really move the needle on an analysis unless you have a very complex intersection, which this is not. This is a one-way street, or like New York City, Manhattan volumes of pedestrian traffic that impact vehicular flows. In this case, we're certainly not going to see that level. The idea hopefully is to extend that downtown and create a walkable space and attract pedestrians to this area, but certainly not to the level that would have any impact on the level of service of that very low volume driveway.
Okay, so the fact that you have in your analysis, you have no conflicting pedestrian movements still considers the fact that there would be some pedestrian flows in that area?
Yes, the conflicting pedestrian movements isn't necessarily if there's a stop bar. It's if you're making a right turn, which in this case you can't, where there's a signalized intersection, there's pedestrians that impact traffic flow. In this case, at an unsignalized intersection, essentially the pedestrians are going to be observant of the vehicles and they're not going to have that much of an impact. So if a car pulls out, and now that's actually a very good point, if a car pulls out to that stop bar, they're not going to be under the gate anymore. They're going to have enough room before they get to the sidewalk. There's a recognition between the vehicles and the pedestrians and eye contact generally, especially in this sort of environment. It's not like where you're in Manhattan where you have to wait until throngs of people pass by. This is a relatively low pedestrian environment, even though we hope it increases, and certainly a very low vehicular environment. So the pedestrians really are not going to have any impact on that level of service where they would, say, at a signalized intersection where they actually can control the flow of traffic, or where you have heavy pedestrian volumes.
Mr. Bear, may I follow up with a question on that point, please?
Sure, absolutely, Councilor.
Yeah, Mr. Paraguay, wouldn't the PSH of the access point and the foot traffic be at different times of the day?
Yeah, I mean, generally, depending on what the type of retail space is, But the vehicular traffic for residential is between 7 and 9 in the morning. A typical retail space isn't so active. Retail is more active maybe in the evenings, but during the daytime and on weekends. So there is a little bit of a differential peak. What we assume when we do our traffic study is that it all peaks at the same time because we want to look at the worst case scenario, but that's not necessarily the case. And I think particularly in the morning when people are coming out, depending on the type of retail, it won't be as active.
I have no more questions. Thank you, Mr. Perroway. Appreciate it.
No problem. And I just one other thing to point out, a lot of that retail is going to be geared towards serving the residents here. I mean, it's going to be a great amenity for people who live here as well. So you're going to have some of that internal interaction between somebody, say it's a convenience store. They don't have to leave to go get milk. They can walk right downstairs and get it. So there is a little bit of a symbiotic relationship between the residential space and the retail space that is an advantage.
Thank you.
Further questions, I guess, regarding, okay, Gaston, looks like you have one.
Yeah, just one question. I'm not so great at all the traffic studies and whatnot, but I am familiar with one that we had, the township had done. Oh, sorry, township had done back in May of 2019, where they had queues of cars as an actual traffic study, right? So they measured this queues of cars going back about 1,400 feet, which I think is past where the bank is at the moment. Like, is that taken into account in your study as well?
To a certain extent, it is because, I mean, obviously we didn't see any queuing like that because in the times we're in, the traffic volumes are lower. But by bumping it up, it would take that into account to a certain extent. But keep in mind, the goal of my study, a little bit different than, say, a downtown study may be, is to compare what happens with and without this particular project. I'm looking at my narrow focus is more on the impact of this project as opposed to, the downtown as a whole. And that's what I'm doing, comparing scenario A to scenario B. So it's a little bit different of a type of traffic study, but yeah, I mean, if there's queuing that extends past here, that would be reflected from the traffic volumes that we've collected.
Okay, and does it change the level of service at all? So you'd stated as a C, would that shift it down to a D or an F or anything like that?
It really would not. It's independent. The queuing on Milburn Avenue would create potential queuing on side streets. In this case, we're a driveway, a very small driveway. So you're talking about very low volumes of vehicles. So that's not necessarily a concern. I would suspect that the traffic coming off of Douglas Street would have a much greater impact from that queue than the one or two cars every few minutes that tries to slip into that Millburn Avenue traffic flow from this driveway.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Buzak.
First, can we mark this as Exhibit A22?
And I think Mr. Lanzafama mentioned it was Exhibit A4, if I heard that correctly.
I believe it was. It's sheet 4 it's the rendered site plan, which I think we had as A4, Mr. Buzak.
It's, no, wait. Colorized sheet 4 was A10.
Oh, I'm sorry, A10.
And the traffic engineering report is A13.
Okay, so we've been referring to A10, but and maybe that's why I'm confused here. Has this been changed? I thought the testimony was that we changed, or you changed, the location of the garage door. It's not. Is it fair to say that is not shown on this document that is up?
That's correct, Mr. Buzak. The gate is internal into the building, so the drawing really doesn't change. The footprint of the building does not change, so you don't really see it on this. This was just to give you an idea that the gate would be pushed back 10 feet from the current face of the building.
Yes.
And when it was at the,
I'm sorry, please repeat.
When it was at the face of the building, the vehicle would come out and be right where that arrow is.
Correct.
And that stop bar would be there as well, correct?
Yeah, Yes, there's a stop sign here. This was all shown on the original plan, correct?
Right. So I guess I'm missing the point here. If the gate is moved back another 10 feet into the building, so now the car exits the gate, it's still partially in the
I think the
building.
intention is for cars pulling into the building and
Correct.
the concern about them backing up onto Milburn Ave. If the gate,
Okay.
Correct,
Not,
Madam Chair.
not egress, ingress.
It's ingress, yes. It was done for the cars coming in so that if for some reason the gate did not go up, the vehicle would not be, the back end of the vehicle would not be partially extended into the sidewalk area.
Okay, assuming this is only one vehicle was going into the structure at that time, obviously.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Thank you. That answered my question.
It does help with the egress too. The egress and ingress gates will be set back. So now when I pull out and I get to that stop bar, when I'm looking left and right for pedestrians and cars, the gate isn't over my vehicle anymore. It's closing behind me. So I think you might remove I just thought of this as I was talking tonight. I think you might remove a little anxiety from somebody who doesn't want the gate to come down on them to pull out into the sidewalk. So I think there's a benefit for the egress perspective too.
you, Mr. Steinberg, did you have a question? Joe?
Yes, thank you. I don't know whether this is a question for the traffic engineer or whether this is a question back to Mr. Lanzafama. But my question is, why do you have to have an entrance and egress on Milburn Avenue at all?
That's a good question. I heard the board speaking about that before. I think it makes sense because you're going to have a fair amount of your incoming traffic on Milburn Avenue. So rather than send that volume past the site into the intersection of Spring Street and then onto the more narrow one-way street to enter, they can pull straight into Milburn Avenue. Conversely, when somebody's leaving and they want to head to the east on Milburn Avenue towards downtown, if we didn't have that access point, now they're exiting onto Spring Street, going through that spring and exit intersection, coming around the back of the building, coming through Douglas onto Milburn Avenue. So I think the benefit of that access point outweighs any detriment of it. Again, it's not a high traffic generating building, so you're not going to, that driveway is not going to be very busy. But for the people that do use it, I think it's much more convenient to have it. Secondarily, there's a certain element of safety to having two access points. I mean, if the RSIS requires actually a second access point if you have 100 or more parking spaces. I know here we're only at 97, but 3 short, we're right in that realm. And that's a safety concern, having that secondary means of ingress and egress. So I think from just a practical perspective, the fact that there is a driveway there that was active at one point, and from a safety perspective, it makes sense to have both of those access points.
Mr. Lanzafama, want to add to that at all?
I would concur with Craig's analysis. The RSIS is very clear that 2 points of access to a parking garage with 100 or more parking spaces is required. We're only 3 short of that number. So I think having that second means of ingress and egress is a safety issue as well.
So it's good planning and sound engineering.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And we can confirm that because Mr. Lanzafama has been sworn in previously on this application and we've carried his testimony stands.
I acknowledge I'm still under oath. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I didn't catch that. Thank you so much. Mr. Bear.
Yeah, I apologize. I had one other question, Mr. Perlman. Talk to us about how you did your assignments to the two garage doors. Seems to me that well, let me stop there. How did you decide the amount of traffic you would assign to the Milburn Avenue point of access and egress versus the one on Spring Street?
Mostly based on the existing traffic volumes and existing flows, because they're primarily generated by similar uses. So what existing flow is that occurs is going to sort of hold. You have a one-way street configuration, so that made it a little more simplified. If I'm for example, if I'm coming from Spring Street, I'm going to cross Milburn Avenue and take that first driveway. If I'm traveling east on Milburn Avenue, I'm going to take that first driveway. So essentially, the one-way street configuration dictated the distribution at the driveways, and then the surrounding traffic volumes and weight, I guess, of traffic on each of the roadways in the area was the second factor.
Okay, I'm not sure that the existing traffic, the characteristics of the existing traffic would really reflect the assignments to a new, residential development on the corner. I think mostly the case would probably be if they couldn't get into the Milburn one, they might go around to the Spring Street side unless drivers on the Spring Street side are assigned or own a unit over in that location. It just seems to me that maybe we undercounted, not to say it's a large, amount of traffic that's being assigned during the peak hour. Still, we don't have a lot coming straight up Spring. Most of it's coming down Milburn Avenue and making that left-hand turn on Spring. It seems to me that maybe we might have undercounted the amount of traffic that would be accessing the building at the Milburn driveway.
Well, we do have most of we have 90% actually of the inbound traffic coming in the Milburn Avenue driveway, because you're going to go, when you're coming in, you're going to go to the first driveway you hit. And
Right.
Basically the only way that the first driveway you hit is Spring Street is if you're coming up Spring Street, which, isn't a major thoroughfare. So you're coming from the east on Essex Street or the west on Milburn Avenue. And in both cases, the first driveway you encounter, because Spring Street's one way, is the Milburn Avenue driveway. Now, when you're leaving, you're probably going to take the garage door that's closest to where you parked. And since we're on either side of the parking field, that's about a 50-50 split, depending on which driveway you parked in. So that's why the egress is more of a 50-50 split. So
Okay.
It's sort of taking into account human nature along with those traffic volumes. To be honest with you, with the levels of service that I'm getting and the volumes, if I put them all at one driveway versus all at the other, I don't think we'd see too much of a difference in that driveway operation. You might see a little bit more impact at the intersections if they were all on the Spring Street driveway, but I really don't think that the operational conditions, if say 60% of the people use Milburn Avenue versus 50%, would materially change anything.
We'd likely still be a level service C, even at that point. Okay.
Not certainly, yes.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I know we paused to take questions at that point. I don't know if you had more testimony, Mr. Paraguay or Mr. Sheehan.
Mr. Paraguay has more testimony. Let's move, if we can, Mr. Paraguay, from the Milburn Avenue access point to the Spring Street access point, and ask you to make any comments that you feel are cogent with regard to the functioning of that point of ingress and egress on Spring Street.
Yeah, and again, we have good levels of service at that Spring Street driveway. Spring Street's a much lower volume road. It's still a one-way configuration, so you have that left in, left out. I think the impact to the sidewalk is less critical there. Obviously, you're going to have less pedestrian volume on Spring Street as opposed to along Milburn Avenue. But that being said, we still have that same type of garage configuration, those doors that go up in 10 seconds. And I don't see any operational issues with the Spring Street driveway.
No potential level of service changes at all, right?
No.
Right now, we're going to come back to Spring Street when you talk about off-site and on-site parking. But before we get to the parking question, would you please address the concerns that the board had by describing the manner in which the loading and delivery cutout on Essex Street is designed to function?
Sure, and I know there was some discussion at the last hearing I was listening to about that. I think this is a great benefit. To be honest with you, when I'm doing residential buildings, this is one of the biggest asks, is where can we have a cutout or some place for the pizza delivery guy, the Uber pickup, the Amazon delivery, the garbage, and we were able to do that here, and I think it's a great benefit. Now that cutout is 90 feet in length, so it's a good length. I think rarely would you have multiple vehicles in there, but you could. If you had, say, an Uber driver in a car, that's a 20-foot car. The UPS guy is in a 30-foot truck, and the garbage truck is a 30-foot truck. You're still only at 80 feet, so you still have enough room in there. On top of that, that left lane on Essex Street is an extra wide lane. I don't know if there used to be parking on that side and it was removed, but you have a 20-foot lane. So even if for some reason there was some calamity of activity in that loading zone and somebody had to pull over on the curbside of Essex Street, they're still out of that travel lane. So this really works well, having that large area and the ability for a garbage truck to pull off the road and for the delivery truck. But even still, that side of Essex Street is a little bit more wide open. So I think, again, this is a great benefit, and most buildings, I think, wish could do this. And I think this is excellent that you're going to have that ability for the Amazon guy and the delivery people to pull off the road, and same with the garbage. And keep in mind, when these Amazon delivery people or UPS delivery people pull over, they're not necessarily only delivering to this building. They may have other locations. So this is could be a regional benefit too, if the guy can park here and go across the street and around the corner of the neighbors' buildings too.
Two follow-up questions on that cutout, please, Mr. Paraguay.
Sure.
With regard to long-term user, move in, move out, by way of example, those would be by pre-arrangement and appointment, correct?
Correct, yes. And invariably in these buildings, if you, for some reason, are moving and you have a large moving truck that takes up a significant amount of space, you have to schedule that move in and move out with the building management.
And finally, on the cutout, to achieve this objective, it would require an approving resolution of the governing body as well, correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding, yes.
All right. Now, in your preparation for the report that was dated November 30th, 2020, you indicated a survey of on-site and off-site parking opportunities. Can you describe the element of parking as it is related to the RSIS standard and the ordinance requirements under the RMF AH2 zone, please?
Sure. If you take a strict interpretation of the RSIS requirements based on the number of bedrooms and number of units in the building, it would require a total of 104 parking spaces. But again, that's a blanket requirement, and it's not really a requirement. Those are more of maximums. The RSIS allows for boards to deviate from those standards. But if you just took a look at their sort of recommendations, you'd be at 104. But then right after they give you the parking requirements, they indicate in the RSIS that alternative parking standards are acceptable, and that's based on household characteristics, availability of mass transit, urban versus suburban location, and available off-site parking. So there's 4 criteria that they give. Household characteristics. If I look at this particular census tract in Milburn, the vehicle ownership and rental units is 1.22 vehicles per unit. So that's far lower than the RSIS requirement of close to 2 per unit. Availability of mass transit. We're a 2,500 foot walk from the train station. Certainly tenants who move into this building that's going to be one of the features that attracts people to here and attracts people to Milburn is the ability to use the train. So we check that box. urban versus suburban location. Not classically urban, but we're certainly not looking at a garden apartment complex out in Sussex County. This is a walkable community, and there's off-site parking, there's available parking resources, which is the next tick mark, but certainly more of an urban than a suburban environment. And the last thing, again, available off-site parking. Just doing an inventory around the building, there's 24 today. There's 24 on-site, on-street parking spaces, not including the ones that are across Essex Street that are 15 minutes for the police station. So there are 24 existing parking spaces. When all said and done, there's going to be 9. We're taking those 40. There's angled spaces on Spring Street, making them parallel. So there'll be 19 parking spaces on the street surrounding the area. So that is, again, more than the 0 that you'd find at a garden apartment complex out in the middle of the woods someplace. So there are 4 criteria that the RSIS gives you. All 4 of them are met in this location to reduce the parking demand. And then on top of that, the ordinance does say a minimum of 1.75 spaces per unit, which we meet, and then we have the 4 additional for the retail space, coming to 97. So we do meet the ordinance requirement, which to me is the ultimate justification in a deviation from the RSIS. But if you look at specifically what they spell out, we check all those boxes. Lastly, I do have parking data from the ITE, just like the trip generation data. They give us parking data. And based on the ITE, this type of development would have a maximum parking demand of 1.15 spaces per unit based on ITE, which would be 61 for the residential. And they also break that down per bedroom. In the more recent edition, they've finally given us this data, which I think is very helpful. And based on the bedroom count, it would be 67 parking spaces. So again, we have 97, 93 for the residential, 4 for the retail. I think more than enough parking in this garage, and certainly meeting that higher RSIS standard really would make sense in this setting.
How about the size of the spaces that are provided on site, being 9 by 18, Mr. Paraguay?
Yeah, it's a miracle because invariably in garage residential parking, 9 by 18 spaces and 24-foot wide drive aisles are what you'd see at a shopping center, at a Target, at a Walmart. I routinely, nightly probably am justifying the smaller size parking spaces because you're in a residential low turnover garage. So this is a nice, generous layout in this garage, and certainly will flow safely and efficiently.
Now, Mr. Paraguay, to make certain that the quantitative analysis is fully informed, can you indicate for the board, members of the interested public, the timing limitations on any of those 19 parking spaces that you referred to on the perimeter around the project?
Yeah, there's a couple meters on Spring Street. It's a 1 hour meter, I believe. And then there's one on Essex Street that's 2 hours. And then Milburn, I believe, is all 2 hour limits. So this isn't going to be long-term parking. It's not going to be overflow parking for the residents. It would be retail customers or a short-term visitor.
But those time limitations do not apply to Sundays or holidays, correct?
Correct, they don't, yes. So you could have visitors all day on Sunday, I guess.
All right, what findings and conclusions did you come to based on your study and expertise?
In terms of the offsite impacts, you're not. This is actually an incremental improvement over the bank that's obviously purely vehicular driven and generates more traffic. So offsite impacts from a traffic perspective, you're not going to see any with this project. The level of service analyses bear that out. I think the access is designed the best way that it could be. And I think that the site circulation is fantastic and above what you typically see for a residential building in this neighborhood. And from a personal standpoint, I think the building looks a lot nicer than the bank did.
Right. I have no further questions of this witness, Madam Chair, and submit him to the examination of the board on the full range of his testimony.
Thank you. Yes, we'll take further questions from the board, and then we will take questions from the public as well. Mr. Bear.
Mr. Paraguay, this site plan assumes that the governing body has given approval for the reduction of parking along Spring Street, as you mentioned, and I think Mr. Lazafama mentioned in his testimony that there would be a reduction of parking available from 23 spaces down to, I think you said 9, is that correct? So a
I
loss
think-
of 14 spaces.
Along Spring Street, right now, there's 11 angled spaces.
11 angle,
Yeah, and this would go back to 5.
5, so you lose 6, but
You
that
lose
would be,
6.
right, okay. So that action would be subject to approval by the governing body, which has yet to act on this. Therefore, my question to you is that with the existing conditions, the 11 spaces, would you testify that everything that you've said tonight would still be the same? You'd still have the same level of service, the access and egress would still operate the same, circulation would still be good? Could you testify to the fact that with the existing conditions, since there's been no approval yet of the removal of parking, it's not subject to this application either, or part of this application either, could you testify to that effect?
Yeah, and it's not something that rises to the level of service. If those 11 angled spaces stayed there, and they could, the geometry is technically sufficient. It's just a little bit tight. It's a narrow street. It's tight as it is now, and we're putting the driveway across the street. But if those 11 spaces stayed there, I don't think there's any substantial detriment. So if this shift doesn't happen, certainly not gonna see any impact to the levels of service. It'll just be a little bit tighter for backing out of there.
So you wouldn't see any safety, unsafe conditions over there either?
No,
Okay.
no, it's not, doesn't rise. to
Meet
that
all
level.
criteria. Okay, thank you.
Mark, you can go next.
Great, thank you. I too want to echo. I'm very pleased by your responsiveness to many of the questions from previous meetings, and I just want to reiterate thank you because there has been significant input and support by Milburn residents for a sustainable Milburn and a sustainable downtown in particular, with green building standards during the listening sessions that many of us, in the workshops that many of us participated in during the 2018 master plan reexamination. And I'm really pleased by your commitment to at least a minimum LEED Silver certification and a contribution to a healthy community. And my question just basically goes back to Milburn Avenue, and it just sort of builds on Dan Baer's question. I'm just sort of stuck on the fact that wouldn't the type of retail that goes into that space really dictate the potential for greater foot traffic intensity? So for instance, if the tenant were to be something like a Pepe's of New Haven, or even an Arturo's kind of venue, which would definitely attract a heck of a lot more foot traffic from high school students making their way down Millburn Avenue from school, and potentially, as those venues do, attract visitors from surrounding towns and flood the downtown. Wouldn't that impact? Wouldn't that change your study's thesis a bit?
What's really dictating it is the size of the space. It's a 3,000 square foot retail space. So there's only so many uses that could make sense in there and that would fit in there. And there's only so much pedestrian or vehicular traffic that they could generate. What moves the needle in terms of pedestrian traffic at an unsignalized intersection is far greater than anything that I can imagine that you would put into a 3,000 square foot space. This is street level supportive retail of the area is the intent. If something like you mentioned does go in there, say a very popular restaurant, I think is what you were referring to. Yeah, that may have some more foot traffic, but it's going to be later in the evening when the residents are already home, or it's going to be on the weekends when there's less traffic in and out of the building. So there is a little bit of a symbiotic relationship in terms of that driveway being active and a type of use that might generate a lot of pedestrian activity.
Or the proximity to the high school, though, so that could basically alter that can basically, change the numbers. There are a lot of students that come out during, you know, to go to various venues. I mean, they're going to be there anyway, but they could be attracted to something that's more attractive to them, like a pizza, like a great pizza venue. Who knows?
Yeah, possibly. I'm sure that'll be one of the things that a retail tenant might consider going in there. But again, it's just not, it's simply not the size space or not the type of retail that's going to generate enough foot traffic that would replicate, you know, a block in Manhattan, which is what you're really looking at to change substantially the activity at an unsignalized intersection.
Thank you.
Sanjeev.
Thank you. I want to go back to that space where you have loading and unloading and drop-off area. I see the length on them. You mentioned about 80 feet altogether. If you put 3 vehicles in there, including the small U-Haul and car and a garbage truck. What is the width in there?
I'm sorry, what is
The width.
the width? It should be 8 feet, 7 or 8 feet. I think it's 8 feet. Mike maybe can correct me quickly if he knows off the top of his head.
It's 7 feet wide.
7 feet, okay, yeah.
And that's good
typical
enough for a truck?
Parking lane, sure, yeah.
And what is that dotted line after that? Is that where till the building is or your property is?
This
I'm
black,
guessing that's a saw cut line.
the heavy black line is the property line.
The dotted line, Mike, on the road.
This dotted line is a saw cut line, correct?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, thank you. Other questions for Mr. Paraguay from the board? Oh, Mr. Buzak.
Yeah, just to follow up on testimony just now, that bolded dotted line beneath the cutout area, is it the testimony that is the property line? No, going down that one.
This one here.
Yes.
That is the property line, correct, Mr. Buzak?
Okay, all right. So that I was trying to understand why you needed township approval to cut that out, and now I understand because you're dealing with right of way.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure thing. Okay, seeing no further questions at the moment from the board, I would like to open it up to questions from the public for Mr. Paraguay. And I see, and you can do it by using the raise hand function. And I see we already have our first question from Ms. Mazaway. So Eileen, if you want to bring her over.
Madam Chair, should I stop sharing the screen or do you want to leave it up?
You can stop sharing for now. I can't guarantee you won't be asked to put back up, but go ahead. Thanks. Good evening, Ms. Mazaway. Hi.
Good evening, Chair, members of the board. I do have a few questions for Mr. Paraguay with regard to his testimony. I'm not sure that we'll need the site plan up. I think we can kind of talk through it, but if we do need it, I'll ask if that's okay.
Great. And if you could just introduce yourself for the record.
Yes, good evening, everyone, and new members of the board in particular. My name is Jennifer Mazaway, M-A-Z-A-W-E-Y. I'm a partner with the law firm of Genova Burns, and we represent Milburn Courtyard Associates, LLC, an interested party and property owner in Milburn. We've attended the previous hearings and we've asked some questions of the witnesses thus far, and I do have a few questions for Mr. Paraguay. May I begin?
Please go ahead. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Paraguay, with regard to the site driveway on Milburn Avenue and the movement of the gate to 10 feet inside, how many cars can fit in the driveway between the gate and the street? Is it only one?
It's one car between the gate and the sidewalk. And then a second car could fit across the sidewalk without impacting the street.
Okay, so anything more than 2 residents entering at, any given time would cause queuing onto Milburn Avenue. Is that fair to
No,
say?
No, the residents entering the gate will go up before they even pull across the sidewalk, and they'll pull right in. So you'd have to have 3 residents entering at the same time with a gate malfunction for some unknown reason to have any impact on Milburn Avenue. So very, very slim chance.
Does the driver have to click a button, or is it something that's automatic on their car when they're approaching the garage?
I understand the testimony of Mr. Johnson was that it was all going to be automatic, a sticker on the car.
Okay, thank you. With regard to the existing bank driveway versus the that existed on Milburn Avenue and the proposed driveway, the bank driveway had free flow of cars, correct? There was no stop bar or anything like that that would prevent a car from entering onto the driveway from Milburn Avenue.
No, well, the drive-through entrance was there, so if there was a queue at the drive-through, there could have been something impeding them, but no stop bar.
Okay. A couple of the board members had asked questions about the retail space on Milburn Avenue and whether that the introduction of potential pedestrians from that new retail space would impact your analysis. But nobody asked about the new group of residents that would be there. Again, because one of the rationales for not meeting the RSIS, as you mentioned, was the fact that you have a more walkable community and more pedestrians. So did you factor in the actual residents in addition to the new retail space in deciding that the pedestrian would not impact your levels of service at the driveways?
Yeah, and I think the board's concern with the retail space, because it's more of an unknown and would likely generate more pedestrian traffic, is what they're bringing it up. But there would certainly be some pedestrian component to the residential use, and it would be smaller than anything that I can imagine that would be in the retail use. But yes, certainly that's factored in.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm thinking more about the cumulative effect between the pedestrians and those, pedestrians that from the residents and the pedestrians that would be going to the retail.
Yeah, and you're not going to see any sort of pedestrian activity from the combination of the two. With, again, that size retail space and this number of units would not have any substantial impact on an unsignalized intersection or driveway.
Okay. With regard to Spring Street, I just want to ask, this may have been asked before, but I just want to confirm, if the angled parking spaces that exist currently on Spring Street were not removed, is it your testimony that the ingress and egress proposed on Spring Street would still work effectively?
Yes, it would still work effectively. It's just, it's more of a perception thing. It's, Spring Street's a narrow one-way street, and those angled spaces make it a little tight. It'll just feel a little bit tighter. So it seemed prudent to go back to the parallel spaces, just, for the look of the overall downtown. But from a safety perspective and an operational perspective, the angled spaces could stay.
Okay. And just finally, with regard to that loading space, it's my understanding that Essex Street is a county road. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe it is.
So any approval with regard to the use of the right-of-way for Essex for that loading and unloading and garbage, would that be subject to county approval, township approval, or both?
It would be county approval. Well, the entire project needs county approval by being on county road, so that would be part of the county's application. I believe the loading zone would just need a municipal action, because if you look in the ordinance right now, it's Essex Street from this point to this point is no parking, so there would have to be something in there that indicated that was a loading zone.
Okay. I think that's all I have for Mr. Paraguay. That's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Do any other members of the public have a question that they want to ask of Mr. Paraguay? Now would be a good time to use the raise hand function in Zoom. It should be near kind of the bottom of your screen if you're on a laptop. Okay, seeing none, I will turn it back to Mr. Sheehan. Was Mr. Paraguay your final witness?
Yeah, the applicant rests subject to any required rebuttal in the event that there is an opposition case. and at this point relinquishes the platform to the chair for appropriate further action.
Thank you. So at this point, I believe, Mr. Buzak, we would open it up to the public for testimony. That sound?
Yes, that is correct. We should open it up for any comments, not questions, comments.
Perfect. So that said, Ms. Mazaway, I see, has comments to provide. So we'll, as we call her in, and this time, because you're providing testimony, you will be sworn in and then provide your statement.
Well, I don't know if Ms. Mazaway is actually providing testimony or if she's just making comments on behalf of her client. If she's going to call someone as a witness, then the witness will have to be sworn in, but her comments are comments as an attorney representing someone else.
Thank you.
So my intent would be to give comments on behalf of my client, but if it's certainly up to the board if there are other people that need to testify from the public. I'll defer to the board whether you want me to wait on my comments or or go now.
At this point, we don't have any other hands raised, so I will ask you to proceed. Go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you. We have attended, obviously, the 3 hearings that the board has had with regard to this application. We presented a technical objection as the hearing began and asked that the board defer hearing this application while the ordinance, the underlying ordinance on which this plan is based, was determined in court whether or not it's a valid ordinance. We recognize that the board determined at that point that absent a stay, it could proceed. That being said, our concerns that we've raised in the litigation related to the ordinance are valid, and I'd like to at least just share those with the board as part of my comments with regard to the application. We feel the application is inadequate on 3 major levels. 1, a policy level, 2, a planning level, and 3, just the basic layout of the plan itself. So with regard to the policy, this is the downtown of Milburn, and this space and this property had for a long time been included in the B4 business downtown district of the township of Milburn. It's been said at times that this property is located at the edge of downtown, but frankly, we believe that the change in zoning to allow this project to proceed is actually a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it will create this edge of downtown and ultimately become the catalyst for other shrinking of what should be and what has been a vibrant downtown environment for businesses. At the same time, the township has undertaken a vision plan and vision study for the downtown and has included this parcel in that, and has commissioned the architects and planners from Perkins Eastman to review the downtown of Newark, including this parcel, and to contemplate changes to traffic flows, the potential for Millburn Avenue to return to a 2-way street, and other ways in which to create and maintain a vibrant downtown. So for this process to be happening at the same time really seems to be working at cross purposes. So we feel that it's really the zoning here was inappropriate, and furthermore that it was spot zoning. This was one parcel located. The entire block wasn't designated for this process or for this type of project, but only the L in what otherwise would be what otherwise could have been a fuller block if the intent was truly to change the makeup of this area of the downtown. And that's the kind of the policy of this. With regard to the planning itself, we feel that the applicant and the application was required to request a certain number of variances and did not. And not only did they not seek those variances, but they did not adequately testify with regard to what we believe are variances under Milburn's existing zoning ordinances. With regard to loading, the Milburn ordinance, section DRZ 607, with regard to off-street parking and loading, requires at least one off-site loading space and it references multiple uses for which at least one off-street loading space is required. The retail, restaurant, office, all require at least one off-street loading space. This application provides 0 and has not asked for relief from the zoning ordinance. Therefore, it's deficient. With regard to parking, the new ordinance under which this application has proceeded, the 606.4.2, creating the residential multifamily affordable housing zone, requires 3 parking spaces for the non-residential space along the building's Millburn Avenue frontage, what we've been talking about as the retail part of this application. Yet the applicant is only allowing parking for its employees. So it's not truly providing the required parking for the use that it is providing on this on the Millburn Avenue frontage. Also, with regard to the refuse, again, going back to Milburn Code DRZ 607, it also has a provision which requires a minimum of 1 trash garbage pickup location, either within or outside a building. However, they are to be screened to be obscured from view from parking areas, streets, and residences. The proposal here would have dumpsters on Milburn Avenue and on Essex Street at different times of the day, different days of the week, waiting for pickup from a garbage company, all the while used in the public right of way. And that would have required a variance. That variance was not sought, and there was no testimony with regard to that variance. So we believe that that from a planning perspective, the plan is also deficient. Overall, with regard to the plan, the proposal for the garbage we don't believe is appropriate in new construction such as this, where again you'll have the unsightly garbage dumpster out on the street for multiple times during the week, could be for hours at a time, in an area where we are trying to attract businesses and residents and pedestrians. We also think that the proposal is bad for the downtown. They're proposing to eliminate available on-street parking for your shoppers, for people to come and utilize the business district and the downtown, and at the same time going to try to attract a retail or commercial tenant. It really, the two things, again, working at cross purposes. The proposal would also create new curb cuts on Spring Street where they don't exist now, and at the same time remove curb cuts from Essex where they do exist now. It just doesn't seem to be logical in terms of what is there now and working versus what's being proposed. The generator location is not screened from the neighbor. Its location close to the property line of the commercial neighbor is also inappropriate and not properly screened. The transformer location also outside, whereas the applicant could have and should have sought to have it put inside the building in a vault room, for instance. And also, the plan that is being proposed requires both township action and county action in order to be successful. So we have requests that are outside, frankly, the purview of the board, and are going to be reliant on action from third parties, namely the county and the township committee. So we'd like to keep that in mind, and we think that the plan really just suffers from some of those shortcuts, if you will, that would have made this a better plan for the downtown in Milburn. I thank you and thank the board for your time, for the opportunity to ask questions of the witnesses and also to give a statement this evening. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Okay. Any other members of the public? I don't see at this time anybody else raising their hand to make any statements. Okay.
Madam Chair, can I ask you? I got a message from Srini. I think he has been bounced from panelists to attendees.
Thank you
Can
for
we bring them back,
mentioning
please?
that. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. I can go ahead and bring him back in. Appreciate that.
I think Reese just woke up off the couch.
Nicole, I think we're hearing you a little bit.
Shut the slider.
Thanks. Okay. So I think is Srini coming back in? Not yet. Sometimes there's a delay.
Yeah, he is.
Okay, great.
I see him on the attendee list again.
Okay, thank you. So Ed, how would we like to go from here? Because I know we're sort of collecting thoughts and probably comments and conditions over the course of a few different meetings at this point.
Now, is it okay to make a comment from the board side also, or just the public?
Absolutely, yep.
Okay, let
Madam
me know
Chair,
when we
before,
can.
Madam
Go ahead,
Chair,
Mr. Sheehan, go ahead.
before deliberations begin, I would like to make a summation for the applicant's case, if the board is interested in hearing it.
I just want to confirm, as you concluded the case, are you giving a counter statement to what we just heard, or this is your summation for the end of your testimony?
It is the final summation.
Okay, I would be willing to hear that, sure. Thank you, go ahead.
Right, you have heard Ms. Mazaway, a distinguished member of the Land Use Bar in New Jersey, summarize the counts of the complaint that has been filed in the Superior Court, alleging that the ordinance itself is subject to infirmity by reason of a procedural issue in terms of availability for public comment, in terms of an allegation of spot zoning, and in terms of an inconsistency with the master plan. Those issues, when filed, would have been subject to an application for a temporary injunction. No such application was made before the court, and soundly so, because of the 4 requirements for temporary injunctive relief or preliminary injunctive relief. The applicant or the litigant must demonstrate irreparable harm and a need to preserve the status quo. It must be demonstrated that there is no adequate remedy at law. It must be demonstrated also that there is a likelihood of success, and in this instance, there is clearly no irreparable harm. The status quo is preserved by reason of the fact that the application is pending before this board and is not being built. There is an adequate remedy at law in the event that the applicant chooses to file an appeal based on any approval that this board might bring. And there is an unlikelihood of success given the predisposition of courts to sustain municipal action at the Superior Court level contesting the ordinance. And the risk of this application is assumed by the applicant alone. So for those reasons, the demonstration of the proofs underlying the complaint bears no relevance to the proceeding today before the board, just as it bore no relevance at the time that this argument was first made prior to the hearing originally held in November of 2020. As to the policy questions raised by the opposition, the RMF AH2 zone recognizes the particular suitability for a mixed-use, multifamily, commercial development with inclusionary affordable housing at Block 11211, lots 1 and 7. As such, the ordinance promotes the general welfare in an identifiable way at a site that has been too long vacant. As such, it is not inconsistent with the master plan. It is not spot zoning, since it provides a public benefit through the requirement of affordable inclusionary housing. The ordinance establishes dimensional regulations specific to the location and design and massing standards sensitive to the context in which the site is located. The proposed site plan and architectural design comply in every respect with the standards of the ordinance as applied. The site plan issues involving stormwater management, screening, and landscaping have been engaged and addressed with appropriate site plan modifications. The concerns for safety for drivers and the public at the Millburn Avenue point of access have been discussed and deliberated thoroughly, resulting in the reset of the automatic overhead garage door and testified to by a recognized traffic engineering expert. Other site functions regarding ingress and egress at Spring Street and the loading and the delivery on Essex Street have been effectively considered and addressed. In effect, the site layout and design was created to accommodate an adjoining neighbor to the south whose property driveway encroaches on the subject proposed development site. The ordinance has been fully complied with and the site plan functions evaluated and efficiently managed. The allegations with regard to garbage treatment, sanitary waste is largely disingenuous, given the testimony of Mr. Yeager, who indicated that the garbage would be stored on site and effectively managed through collection by bringing it out to the street to meet the garbage truck. The fact that city action and municipal action is required for the loading zone does not in any way create an unusual situation for a planning board with the experience of the Millburn Township Planning Board. It is routine. In fact, the county will not assess its reaction to a site plan on a county road until the municipal action is complete in Essex County. It's respectfully submitted that the applicant has demonstrated entitlement to site plan approval for the subject 53 residential, multifamily, and 3,000 square foot commercial use project under the ordinances of the Millburn Township and the municipal land use law. And in that regard, I respectfully commend it to the board's favorable consideration and thank the board for its patience in hearing these remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. Okay. So yes, I believe Sanjeev, your question was, could you bring something up? And that's exactly what this time right now is for the board to discuss amongst ourselves whether that's in, recalling any conditions we were considering imposing, or and raising any, other concerns or questions that have come about.
Sure. Thank you.
So did you want to raise anything, or that was just your question?
Let Joe go first. It's fine. I'll
Okay,
wait for a
that's
little
fine.
bit,
Go
yeah.
ahead, Joe.
Well, I just want to say that unless I'm convinced otherwise by comments from other members of the board, I will vote against the site plan approval here. I am not convinced at all, and nothing that has been testified to has convinced me that the access and exit points on Milburn Avenue are necessary for this project. I think that it's really for the owner's convenience. The exit and entrance points could have been limited to the side street, and should have been, in my judgment. Putting that entrance gate 10 feet further into the building does nothing for the issue of whether there's any site impairment from to drivers who are exiting or trying to exit from the garage across that street, which is populated to a large extent at various times of the day by boys and girls coming and going to the high school. I think that's a very unsafe condition. There's been a lot of discussion by the witnesses and by others about that this is better than the bank, or worse than the bank. That's irrelevant. The bank's gone. It's not there. And we must face the issue of whether this is a good design for this building and for the entrance and exit points. I don't believe that it is required that this project, as I said before, have an exit and entrance on Milburn Avenue at all. And the fact that the bank did or did not have one there is, in my judgment, totally irrelevant. I'm primarily concerned about the safety of people exiting and entering the building, and the people who walk on that sidewalk. And nothing has convinced me, listening to the testimony, to the contrary. So unless I'm convinced otherwise by other members of the board, I think this is a relatively dangerous project from the point of view of safety of people, particularly people exiting the building in their vehicles. I think their sight lines up Milburn Avenue would be greatly impaired. And I understand that the ordinance provides that there should be no consideration of any exiting or entering or exiting of the building for 100 feet from that corner. I don't know how you go about measuring where the actual corner of those two streets are, but let's assume for a moment that the 100-foot distance has been met. I still think that this is a dangerous project from the point of view of that exiting, proposed exiting and entrance point. Nothing has convinced me to the contrary. And as I said before, unless I'm convinced otherwise by other members of the board, it is my intention to vote against this project. I am not at all convinced, I know as a matter of law, that this board has nothing to say about the arguments that have been made in court, whether or not the ordinance adopted the rezoning of this property by the township committee is valid or invalid. That's really not for this board to even consider. So much of what the attorney for the objectors said, and much of what the attorney for the applicant said would be valid points to be made in a courtroom arguing whether or not the ordinance is a valid ordinance, but not before this board. And I think counsel will back me up on this point. This is not a point for this board to decide. This is simply an application for site plan approval. And I am unconvinced that this site has been properly utilized in the proposed plan before the board. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Joe. I guess can I just clarify, can I ask you a question just to clarify your standpoint, which is that you recognize that the zoning ordinance permits a vehicular entrance on Milburn Avenue, but your concern or what you're not convinced is that it will be done in a manner that's safe?
When you say it permits it, my recollection of the ordinance is that it says that there shall be no entrance or exit closer than 100 feet from the corner.
It says, no, it says, I'm looking at it specifically, G, 606.4.2 G, circulation and parking, just reads vehicular entry. One vehicular entrance to structured parking is permitted along the Milburn Ave frontage. Said entrance shall be located a minimum of 100 feet.
The answer to your question is yes. Now that you've reminded me of the language of the ordinance, it does permit an entrance and exit. I think this one is designed poorly and does not, I'm unconvinced that it is designed with the safety of both the operators of the vehicles and more particularly of the pedestrians on that sidewalk in mind.
Okay.
Well, I'm opposed to it.
Okay, I understand your point. Okay. Does anybody else have any comments or thoughts to that? Go ahead, Sanjeev.
So I think it's a great project, has multiple housing or multifamily housing, has commercial space. I fail to understand when we give so much amenities within the building, why is there garbage truck needs to be out on the road? And why is loading and unloading needs to be out on the road? Why can't we do it within the premises, whether it's an open area on the premises or in the parking or in the garage? When we are doing so much in the building, 52 apartments with the commercial space in there, I understand ordinance didn't cover this, but why can't we, if there's a furniture being unloaded from the truck and it drops on the road, it is not safe. You are doing it right next to the lane where the traffic is going through. So I have problem, I seriously have high concern with the garbage being picked up on the road as well as with the loading and unloading. You can make space where there's drop off happening, which is like a minute thing. You get off the car from Uber, you get in, or spouses dropping the other partner or spouse, that's fine. But loading, unloading, where we keep talking about, oh, it is not going to be that long and it will be scheduled. There are 52 apartments. If there is one apartment going out, the other one is also coming in. So I think it's not safe. there has to be a place within the premises off the road where the loading and unloading happens along with the garbage. Truck needs to go in and pick it up and get out. So that's my concern in this whole. Otherwise, the project is great. There is good apartments, good amenities. Everything else seems good to me, but I have concerns on loading and unloading.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else have thoughts, concerns? Can you remind me, either Sanjeev, if you know it, or what the loading requirements, or Paul Phillips, if you happen to have it in front of you, how we handled loading in this zoning? Because I know it is
I
required.
don't think ordinance covers the loading and unloading. Paul, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
There are no specific provisions in this zone dealing with loading per se.
Okay, but whereas in the B4 that it just spun off from, there was a requirement for a loading?
No, I think what I was saying is, so far, we have not put that in the ordinance. But I think this is something that we need to also cover within the ordinance going forward. But on these, on this application, ordinance doesn't cover it.
Okay, yeah, no, I understand. Thank you.
May I just follow up on that, Madam Chair?
Sure.
And also, I think with Paul as well. I think we're talking about two different loading concepts. Mr. Vinayak is speaking about loading in the sense of the cutout area, a drop off, public vehicles, I'm sorry, private vehicles, Amazon deliveries and so forth, for a residential development. I think as Paul said, our planner said, we don't have a requirement, I don't think, in this ordinance, nor I dare say elsewhere in residential areas that deal with a loading space for residential purposes, so to speak. The objector's attorney raised, I think, a different issue or related issue, which is a loading space required for non-residential activities. And we deal with those requests routinely at this board, typically applicants seeking variances from a requirement that there be a commercial or non-residential loading space. What I'm unclear about right now is whether that loading space requirement for non-residential purposes is applicable in this zone. It's certainly not, I should say, I don't think it's mentioned anywhere in this ordinance that refers to it, but I can't recall offhand if that loading requirement was townwide for non-residential or directed to specific zones.
Mr. Buzak, I may be not clear when I said loading, unloading. I'm not too worried about Uber coming in and dropping people off. My loading, unloading concern was mainly with move in and move out. So that is for the residents of the building who are coming in and residents who are leaving from the building. So that's the unsafe environment right on the roadside when you're bringing all the furnitures down from the truck and taking them in. Most of the buildings have it on their premises where you can get in. Sometimes it's within the garage or sometimes it's outside where there's nothing, just an open space right next to the service elevators that you can pull in and move out from there. Generally, the garbage also gets out from the same place. So just to clarify that.
I don't know, Paul or Eileen, with regard to, I understand the comment from Mr. Vinayak, but in terms of loading space for non-residential, a different issue. Is there a requirement that there be a loading space in this zone for the non-residential portion?
No, not that I've seen.
There's nothing specific to this zone with regard to off-street loading, whether it be for the residential or the retail commercial space. There are generic standards for loading in the ordinance by use. And I believe, and Eileen can correct me, there are no requirements for residential, but there are for various retail, commercial, and they're spelled out. Some don't. I think some of the uses don't require it, and then there's a square footage threshold for others, and some I think require one loading space, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, and by loading, for example, we don't have any type of I guess if you want to call it loading space, if you're referring to the delivery, moving in, moving out, we don't have any kind of a requirement for, in any of the other zones, the R8s for apartments or anything like that, for specifically for moving vans. So if you're referring to that as loading and unloading, I don't know that that's really what the loading requirement is meant to address. I think it's more commercial in nature, deliveries, and things like that.
And I would concur with what Eileen just cited.
Okay. Other thoughts, comments from our board members? Any consensus or different concerns to be raised?
I do. Would there be a way, to Mr. Steinberg's point, would there be a way for the Milburn Avenue to just be egress, one way instead of both in and out? Would there be a way for just to have one way out so that the people aren't going in there, so the traffic isn't setting up in the queue? And so if you live in the building, you would just go in from Spring Street? Could that be something possible? So that you still have the two, you could use it for an emergency, I guess, but you wouldn't have traffic there all the time? Since Spring Street's not
Right, I
so
understand
heavily
your
trafficked,
question.
and with the way the traffic builds up anyway on Milburn Avenue, and we know that it does. Is that possible? Because even though the bank doesn't exist anymore, and I did use that bank, you still could always pull into the side. You weren't necessarily getting in the queue, but you could pull into the side to get into the parking lot. So I don't know. Is that something to think about?
Well, let me just mention this in terms of the structuring the discussion here. It's the board has an application before it, and the applicant has designed the project as he has designed it. There have been comments that have been made throughout these 3 hearings, and there have been adjustments made to the extent that they felt it necessary or appropriate. And what we have before us is the plan. There's been no indication by the applicant that they, despite comments that have been made during the course of tonight's hearing, for example, that they want to rethink what they are proposing or redesign it or whatever. They certainly have that opportunity to do that, and they have that opportunity to do that up until the time the vote is taken. But I just, the board should not be designing the project. That's and I don't mean that critically. We're faced with what the applicant has proposed, and we have to act on that. If we feel there's a safety issue or there are other issues that would support a denial, then we have to do that. But for example, we couldn't approve this subject to a change in design to only have ingress on Millburn Avenue, and everybody thinks, oh, that's a great idea, and we vote and we put that in as a condition. That kind of condition is inappropriate. Any kind of design condition such as that any of the other ones as well. You know, saying, for example, that we approve the application provided that they include an on-site inside loading area or refuse disposal area or so forth. Those are the kinds of things that the comments are well taken, and that's fine, but we have to deal with what we have, and that's it. So thank you.
Right. So I guess at this point, if we were in a room together, Mr. Sheehan, I think we would just kind of look to you for an indication. Would you like us as the board to proceed with the application as stands, as given the testimony that you've heard? I guess I'm turning to you to ask, or if you'd like a few minutes to confer with your client, or if you'd like us to proceed. Anything is, of course, as you know, within your.
I'd like a minute to confer, please.
That's fine. So if you'd like to turn your, mute yourself and turn your camera off, that's fine. Why don't I give you 5 minutes? Be super generous and allow you to chat with your client. Okay.
You want to take a 5-minute recess?
We will take a 5-minute recess because I don't want us to continue the dialogue without.
Okay, and then I'll come back at, according to my computer here, it's 9:29, so 9:35 or 9:34.
Perfect. We'll see you at 9:35-ish.
Okay, very good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Fishman, I didn't turn my camera off because I'm afraid I wouldn't know how to turn it back on.
Then you better leave it on if you're
I'm
afraid.
just gonna leave it on.
At least you know you'll be ready to go.
Right.
Ed? It's Bart Sheehan.
Yes,
We're ready to go back whenever the chair is.
okay.
Thanks, I'm here. I just want to make sure we have our secretary with us as well and the other members. So let's just give it the last 30 seconds. Here we go. Here, just got that the hot tea.
That might say.
There we go. Okay. Hopefully we'll just get the last few back because we're just at 9:35. Welcome back. And just want to wait till so everybody can be here to be hearing it. Sanjeev and Martha, if you're back and ready, turn your cameras on so we can continue. I just need a moment. All right, well, my patience tells me 9:36, so I think we're ready to hear. All right. Eileen, can we go? Is that okay, or should we just wait for everybody to be back?
Let me just look at,
We should wait for everyone to be back because,
Yeah.
well, yeah.
we need the vote.
Okay. Hey, Sanjeev, looks like you're coming back.
Okay.
Okay. I think it's okay if we have the board members if Martha is not here, right?
Yeah, that's
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sheehan, for waiting.
All right, Madam Chair and members of the board, I have conferred with the applicant, and the applicant feels, given the grade changes on the site and the nature of the ordinance, that the application has been presented and designed in as sensitive a way as the ordinance permits and requires, and asks the board if it would continue with its deliberations this evening to a conclusion.
Great. Thank you for that response. Appreciate it. Okay. So just to make sure everybody's on the same page, we are going to proceed and go forward. Their application is as stands, and we will, as Mr. Buzak also alluded to before, we have the application before us. We decide, whether we feel it is appropriate, given the
Do you
zone.
need a motion?
So at this point, if there's no further discussion, we would be at the point of making a motion. I just would, before we do that, would like to ask Mr. Buzak if there were any additional conditions that would need to be discussed if we're going to get to that point.
Well, if the board is considering an approval of this application, I have a number of them listed. Some of these may have been already addressed because I'm going back to the first hearing where I began listing these. So this may be subject to change if in fact they've already been addressed, but let me cover them. That's number one. Number two, there may be other conditions that will turn up in the resolution as I go through my notes in more detail. And in the end, the board will have to look at the resolution before it adopts it to make sure that it is satisfied with the conditions. So I want that to be straight. Third, we have a number of standard conditions for some of the new board members that are inserted in every resolution. That is compliance with all ordinances, obtaining of all permits, obtaining of all other approvals that have to be obtained, payment of all fees, payment of escrows, and those kinds of things. So I typically do not reiterate those conditions. I just say the standard conditions will be in there, and that's what I'm referring to. So here's the conditions that I have. I have a condition related to removal of an oil tank, replacing pole lighting on Douglas and Essex Street, subject to the acceptability to JCP&L, milling and paving of a portion of Spring Street, painted directional arrows, the merging of lots 7 and 1. This application consists of 2 separate lots. Since the application is a composite application involving both lots, the lots ought to be merged. If that may have been testified to, I don't recall directly. The applicant agreed to comply with the forester's report, the fire marshal's report. There will be provided screening for the transformer and the generator. There was testimony regarding safety protocol for pedestrians during construction, and that will be a condition that there be adequate safety protocols that will likely be subject to our engineer's approval, the township engineer's approval. Any changes in parallel parking, any changes in parking on Spring Street is subject to township approval, as would be the cutout on Essex Street that we referred to tonight. Both would be subject to township approval. The garage doors on Milburn Avenue, or the gates will be set back 10 feet from the front of the building. They're seeking a de minimis exception to the parking requirements of the residential site improvement standards. As the testimony was tonight from the traffic engineer, the applicant complies with the standards that are in the township's ordinances. I think our planner confirmed that, but they are different from the RSIS standards. There was testimony tonight regarding the criteria that are utilized, and I think the appropriate action would be to also grant that de minimis exception so everything sort of fits together. Those were, Madam Chair, the conditions that I had noted. I don't know if any other board members have other ones that I missed. And as I said, there may be other ones when the resolution is finally adopted. Those would be conditions I would recommend be included in any motion to approve the application, which would be for preliminary and final site plan approval.
Okay. Gaston.
I just have one quick question. So if let's say the vote doesn't go as well as some people might want it tonight, basically the site plan application goes out and they have a chance to reapply with changes or with anything else. That's correct? It's not like done and won and they could never do it again, correct?
Well, unfortunately, it's probably done, one and done. When an application is denied, it's denied. They can't submit the same application. You don't get a second bite at the apple. If there's a substantial difference between the first application and the second application, it can be done, but I don't think that any member of the board in deciding which way to go should assume that the applicant will be able to come back with a similar type application.
Right, and further, does the applicant have the opportunity to appeal our decision?
Yes, yes. If there's a denial, the applicant has the right to appeal it. That goes to court and it's decided by the court based upon the record that has been established in these 3 hearings and all of the exhibits that have been proffered during the course of this. There's no supplement there's no testimony in court. The court reads the transcripts and then decides the case. Likewise, as you know, we had an objector, and there may be others. They don't necessarily have to come to the meeting and object, but a grant of an approval can likewise be challenged in court by someone who objects to it. And the process is exactly the same based upon the record, and the court decides that case. So any decision, positive or negative, can be appealed to the court by right. There's no, you don't have to do anything other than appeal it. The other thing, this is a little unusual, but I wanted to mention it, although it has been mentioned. There's been reference to a separate lawsuit that was brought, and we disposed of that objection at the beginning. And I think that it was clearly articulated by the applicant's attorney and by Mr. Steinberg that the board is required to act on this application. There's no stay that has been issued by any court. We take the ordinance as it is, and we apply it to the application that is before us. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I may continue, Madam Chairwoman, very, very quickly, just to state where I'm standing.
Yeah.
This is a very difficult one for me, right? I'm on the PTOC Safety Board. To me, safety is paramount. I also am a green advocate, and I think that this application, as far as the green aspects go, is great that they're doing LEED certification. They're trying to keep things quiet. It's really good. As far as the safety goes, I think things could be better. They are using the lights and the sensors. They tried to move stuff back, and they have the stop bar. Hopefully they'll keep the greenery around the entrance clear so it's visible to everybody. Yeah, otherwise, I don't know. I feel like it's a good project. There's some drawbacks, but I still think if they design it properly, it should be okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaston. No, I appreciate your insight. And I agree. I think, personally, from the standpoint of what we read in the zoning, which we, had as a board, an opportunity to review and comment on, at that time, I do feel what we're being presented with has been adjusted to further comply. I do agree that I think some of the pedestrian concerns that are our reality, yes, there's AM and PM peak period, but pedestrian activity, because of the middle school and high school locations both being walkable, I don't know that I felt totally satisfactorily addressed. I think maybe that was what we're hearing from some other board members. But as far as what the application is, I do feel it went a pretty good way to meet what they were asked to do. And I think it would be a great addition to our downtown. That's where I personally feel. Anybody else want to share where they're at or any further concerns? Or if not, we can certainly proceed. Okay. Anybody want to make a motion on this to approve this application? Mark, I think you need to speak.
Yeah, I'd be happy to make a motion to approve the application.
With conditions as to be set forth by Mr. Buzak.
Correct. With the conditions set forth by Council Buzak.
We have a second. Dan Bear, I think you were going to second. Yeah, you're on mute.
I'll second.
Perhaps we could ask everyone, since we're going to be discussing this motion, if everyone can unmute unless there's background noise, so we can get every comment on the record if there are any, and we can get the vote clear, and Eileen won't be struggling to figure out who's voting how.
Daniel Bear?
No, I don't know if there's any we got
Oh,
a
sorry.
motion in a second. And I think the chair was just going to call for any comments on or any discussion on the motion before we took the vote.
Okay.
Or did I just do that?
I think we're okay. Yeah, I think we're ready to go. But I mean, if anybody wanted to speak now or forever, wait to vote. Okay. Feel free to go ahead, Eileen. Thank you.
Daniel Bear,
Yes.
Gaston Halpert,
Yes.
Mark Matzel,
Yes.
Maggie Miggins,
Yes.
Joseph Steinberg,
No.
Sanjeev Benayak,
No.
Srini Vijay,
No.
Beth Zoll.
Yes.
I think that's everybody, right? Because,
Yeah, I think there's 8 of us.
Yes, 8 of us.
okay. Motion
What
carries.
happens if it's 5-3?
Correct. 5 affirmative, 3 not.
And if I might, for the new members of the board, again, the way this works is the board will be memorializing the action that has been taken tonight on this vote at a meeting probably a month from now, after having received a resolution that we will draft, granting the approval and setting forth conditions and so forth. However, because it's a memorializing resolution, the way the law works is that only those members who voted in favor of the motion, whether it was a motion to grant or deny, only those who voted yes on the motion that carried are permitted to vote on the actual resolution itself. So at the meeting a month from now or so, the 5 members who voted yes will be able to vote on that resolution. The 3 that voted no will not be able to vote on the resolution. And that's statutory. That's not a board rule. That's the rule throughout the state on how these proceedings transpire. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. Okay, I now have lost my agenda, but I think there was no new business for this evening. Is that correct? Okay. So thank you all. With that said, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Just remind everyone, again, we have a special meeting coming up on February 24th.
We do. We'll be back together on the 17th is our
that's
next
right.
meeting
Sorry.
at 7:30 p.m. It's a short month with a lot of meetings. So
I was
our
trying-
next meeting is February 17th at 7:30 p.m. here, same link. So we'll see you then. And then, yes, it will be followed by
I was trying to sneak by that February 17th one.
We'll see you then. Okay, so motion to adjourn.
Motion.
A second. Second, thank you, Joe. Okay, meeting adjourned at 9:53 p.m. Thank you all. Be safe.
Be safe.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Wake up, Martha.